There are people who walk through life carrying something most of us don't even notice. A weight. Not the kind you can see or measure, but the kind that sits in your chest when someone cuts you off in traffic, when a friend betrays your trust, when the world seems designed to test your patience. Anger. We all know it. We all feel it. And most of us believe we're justified in feeling it. But what if I told you that the anger you carry isn't really about them? What if the person who hurt you, the situation that enraged you, the injustice that keeps you awake at night, what if none of it has the power you think it does? What if your anger is simply a mirror, reflecting back something you haven't yet understood about yourself? Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk who spent his life in silence and contemplation, discovered something profound in the stillness of his monastery. He found that anger isn't what we think it is. It's not righteousness, it's not strength, it's not even really about the other person. Anger, in its truest form, is a kind of blindness, a refusal to see what's actually happening beneath the surface of our reactions. And here's the paradox that will unsettle you. The moment you truly understand why you're angry, the anger itself begins to dissolve, not because you've suppressed it, not because you've forgiven prematurely or pretended everything is fine, but because you've seen through the illusion that created it in the first place. Most of us spend our entire lives believing that anger is a natural response to being wronged. Someone disrespects us and we feel anger. Someone breaks a promise and we feel anger. Someone acts with cruelty or ignorance and we feel justified in our rage. We hold on to these feelings like precious stones, polishing them in our minds, rehearsing what we should have said, imagining scenarios where justice finally prevails. But Merton saw something different. He saw that anger is almost always rooted in expectation. We expect people to behave a certain way. We expect the world to be fair. We expect ourselves to be treated with the dignity we believe we deserve. And when reality doesn't match these expectations, we experience it as a personal offense, a violation of the contract we thought we had with existence itself. The problem isn't that we have expectations. The problem is that we believe these expectations are more real than reality itself. We construct an entire architecture of how things should be, and then we become furious when the world refuses to conform to our blueprint. We don't get angry at what actually happened. We get angry at the gap between what happened and what we insisted should have happened. Think about the last time you were truly angry, not mildly annoyed, but deeply, viscerally angry. Now ask yourself, what were you expecting? What version of events did you have in your mind that reality failed to deliver? What role did you assign to the other person that they refused to play? In that gap between expectation and reality, anger blooms like a dark flower. And we water it, we feed it, we give it sunlight. We tell the story over and over to anyone who will listen, gathering evidence, building our case, constructing a fortress of righteousness around our wounded pride. But here's what Merton understood, what he learned in the silence of contemplation. The other person isn't your enemy. Your expectation is. The image you created of how they should be, how they should act, how they should value you, that phantom is what you're really fighting. And you can't win a war against a ghost. I once knew someone who carried anger like a second skin. Every conversation was a potential battlefield. Every disagreement was a betrayal. Every differing opinion felt like a personal attack. From the outside, it seemed like the world was constantly conspiring against them. But if you looked closer, if you really paid attention, you'd see something else. You'd see someone who had built an elaborate system of rules about how people should behave, and then experienced genuine shock and outrage every time someone failed to follow rules they never agreed to in the first place. This person would say things like, "I can't believe they did that," or "How could anyone be so selfish?" or "Don't they realize how much they've hurt me?" And beneath every statement was the same assumption, that other people existed to fulfill certain roles in the movie of their life. And when they went off script, it was an act of aggression. What this person couldn't see, what most of us can't see when we're in the grip of anger, is that everyone is living from their own center. Everyone is operating from their own fears, their own wounds, their own limited understanding. The person who betrayed you wasn't thinking about you in that moment. They were thinking about themselves, their needs, their survival. The person who hurt you wasn't considering your feelings. They were acting from their own pain, their own confusion, their own desperate attempt to navigate a world that feels just as chaotic to them as it does to you. This isn't an excuse for bad behavior. It's not a justification for cruelty or negligence. It's simply the truth. And when you can hold this truth without collapsing into either rage or resignation, something shifts. The tight knot in your chest begins to loosen. The endless internal arguments start to quiet. You stop needing them to be different than they are. Merton wrote that pride is the root of anger. Not pride in the sense of healthy self-respect, but pride in its shadow form. The insistence that we are the center of the universe, that our perspective is the only valid one, that our hurt matters more than anyone else's reality. When we're angry, we're almost always operating from this place of wounded pride. How dare they treat me this way? Don't they know who I am? Don't they understand what I've done for them? Notice the emphasis. Me. I. My. Anger is one of the most self-centered emotions we can experience, even when it masquerades as righteous indignation or justified outrage. Because beneath the anger is always the same question. Why aren't you seeing me the way I need to be seen? And here's where the real danger lives. When we can't get people to see us the way we want to be seen, we either try to force them or we punish them. We withdraw our love, we build walls, we rehearse our grievances. We turn them into villains in the story we're telling ourselves, and in doing so, we stop seeing them as whole human beings. They become objects of our anger, cardboard cutouts representing everything that's wrong with the world. But they're not cardboard. They're complex, contradictory, struggling human beings just like you. They wake up every morning with their own anxieties. They carry their own wounds. They're doing their best with the tools they have, even when their best is nowhere near enough. And if you could see them clearly, really see them, you might discover something unexpected. Not necessarily forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. And understanding is the soil from which real forgiveness grows. There's a practice that Merton and other contemplatives have used for centuries. It's simple, but it's not easy. When you feel anger rising, instead of fighting it or indulging it, you pause. You take a breath and you ask yourself, what am I really protecting right now? What part of my self-image feels threatened? What expectation is being violated? You don't ask these questions to make yourself wrong. You ask them to see clearly because clarity is the antidote to anger. When you can see your own mechanisms, your own patterns, your own contribution to the conflict, the anger loses its grip. It doesn't mean the other person was right. It doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It means you're no longer trapped in the loop of blame and resentment. I remember watching a woman discover this in real time. She had been carrying anger toward her sister for years. Every family gathering was tense. Every phone call was loaded with unspoken resentment. The story, she told herself, was clear. Her sister was selfish, ungrateful, incapable of real love, and she had evidence, mountains of it. Every birthday forgotten, every promise broken, every time her sister chose herself over family. But then something happened. Not a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reconciliation, just a moment of clarity. She was telling the story again, rehearsing her grievances to a friend, when she heard herself say, she should have been there for me. And for the first time she really heard the word should. Not, I wish she had been there. Not, it would have meant a lot if she had been there. But should. A demand, an expectation. A rule she had created unilaterally and then felt violated when her sister failed to follow it. In that moment, she saw something she had never seen before. Her sister wasn't failing her. Her sister was simply being who she had always been, someone who struggled with intimacy, who protected herself through distance, who had never learned how to show love in the ways this woman needed. None of that was about her. It was about her sister's own pain, her own limitations, her own journey. And when she saw that, really saw it, the anger didn't disappear immediately. But it changed. It became softer. More like grief than rage. Because she was finally grieving the relationship she wanted, but would never have. Instead of being angry at her sister for not being someone she was never capable of being. This is what Merton meant when he said that humility is the cure for anger. Not humility in the sense of making yourself small or accepting mistreatment, but humility in the sense of recognizing that you are not the measure of all things, that your expectations are not laws of nature, that other people's failures to meet your needs are not evidence of their malice, but simply evidence that they are human, flawed, limited, and struggling with their own demons. When you can hold this truth, when you can really embody it, anger becomes almost impossible. Not because you've transcended human emotion, not because you've achieved some kind of spiritual bypass where nothing bothers you anymore, but because you've stopped demanding that reality be different than it is. You've stopped insisting that people be different than they are. You've let go of the exhausting work of trying to control things that were never yours to control in the first place. But let's be honest about what makes this so difficult. Letting go of anger means letting go of something that often feels good. There's a satisfaction in being right, in being the injured party, in having the moral high ground. Anger gives us energy. It makes us feel powerful when we actually feel powerless. It creates clarity in situations that are actually complex and ambiguous. And perhaps most importantly, it protects us from feeling the deeper emotions underneath. The grief, the hurt, the fear, the profound disappointment that life isn't what we hoped it would be. When you release anger, you have to feel all of that. You have to sit with the sadness that people you love can't love you the way you need. You have to accept that the world is often unfair and there's nothing you can do about it. You have to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing, of not being in control, of being vulnerable in a way that feels almost unbearable. This is why most people don't let go of anger, not because they don't know how, but because what's on the other side of anger feels worse than the anger itself. At least anger is familiar. At least anger gives you something to do, someone to blame, a story that makes sense. Without it, you're left with the raw truth of your own helplessness, your own longing, your own broken heart. But here's what Merton discovered in his years of silence and prayer. That vulnerability, that openness, that willingness to feel everything without the armor of anger. That's where real freedom lives. Not in being invincible, but in being willing to be touched by life, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because when you can sit with your pain without needing to convert it into anger, when you can feel your hurt without needing to hurt someone else, when you can acknowledge your disappointment without needing to make someone wrong, something extraordinary happens. You become available for real connection, real understanding, real love. Anger creates separation. It draws a line between you and them, between right and wrong, between the righteous and the guilty. And as long as that line exists, you're trapped on one side of it, defending your position, gathering evidence, building your case. You can't see the whole picture. You can't see what's true. You can only see your version of the truth, filtered through your wounds, your needs, your desperate desire to make sense of your pain. But when the anger dissolves, the line dissolves with it. Suddenly you can see that there is no them and you. There's just struggling human beings, all of us trying to survive, all of us operating from incomplete information, all of us doing damage we don't intend and carrying damage we didn't deserve. You can see that the person who hurt you is also hurt, that the person who failed you has also failed themselves, that the person you've cast as the villain is also the hero of their own story, and also the victim, and also just confused and scared and trying to figure it out like everyone else. This doesn't mean you have to maintain relationships with people who harm you. It doesn't mean you have to excuse bad behavior or pretend that everything is fine. Boundaries are sacred. Self-protection is wise. But you can establish boundaries without anger. You can protect yourself without making the other person into a monster. You can say no without needing them to be wrong. There's a story about Merton that I think captures this perfectly. A fellow monk came to him once, furious about something another monk had done. He wanted Merton to confirm his anger, to validate his sense of being wronged. Instead, Merton asked him a simple question. Can you pray for him? Not forgive him. Not excuse him. Just pray for him. Hold him in your heart with compassion. The monk was stunned. How could he pray for someone who had hurt him? But Merton insisted. He said that if you can hold someone in your heart with genuine compassion, even while acknowledging the harm they've caused, you've found something more powerful than anger. You've found the ability to see clearly without losing your humanity, to acknowledge wrong without becoming consumed by it, to protect yourself without building walls that keep everyone out. This is the practice. Not a one-time decision, but a daily, hourly, moment-by-moment choice. When you feel anger rising, you pause. You breathe. You feel what's underneath the anger. You notice what you're protecting, what you're expecting, what story you're telling yourself, and then you make a different choice, not to suppress the anger, but to see through it, to recognize it as a signal that you're trying to control something you can't control, or that you're taking something personally that isn't actually about you. Think of it like this. Anger is a messenger, not a master. It arrives at your door with information. Something has violated your expectations. Someone has crossed a boundary you didn't even know you had drawn. Some part of your carefully constructed understanding of how things should be has collided with how things actually are. The anger isn't the problem. The problem is when you mistake the messenger for the message, when you become so focused on the feeling itself that you miss what it's trying to show you. Most people, when they feel anger, immediately start looking outward. They scan their environment for the source of their discomfort. They build a case against whoever triggered the feeling. They gather evidence, construct arguments, prepare for battle. But Merton would ask you to do something radically different. He would ask you to turn inward first. Not to ignore what's happening outside, but to understand what's happening inside. What belief has been challenged? What need has gone unmet? What part of your identity feels threatened? These questions don't excuse the behavior of others. They don't minimize harm or dismiss legitimate grievances. They simply create space for understanding. And understanding is the beginning of freedom. I've watched people spend decades nursing anger over things that happened in minutes. A comment made in passing becomes a defining moment. A single action becomes proof of character. A momentary lapse becomes an unforgivable sin. And all of it gets preserved in the amber of their memory, perfect and unchanged, endlessly re-examined, endlessly re-litigated, endlessly keeping them stuck in a past that can never be altered. But what if the story you're telling yourself about what happened isn't the whole truth? What if your interpretation of someone's motives is just one possibility among many? What if the meaning you've assigned to their actions says more about your fears than their intentions? What if the entire narrative you've constructed is actually a defense mechanism, protecting you from something more painful than anger? This is where Merton's wisdom becomes radical. He suggests that most of our anger is actually a form of self-protection. We get angry because being angry feels safer than being vulnerable. We attack because defending feels too risky. We build walls because opening our hearts has led to pain before, and we've decided never to let that happen again. But here's the cruel irony. In protecting ourselves from pain, we create a different kind of suffering. A loneliness that comes from keeping everyone at arm's length. A rigidity that makes every interaction feel like a potential threat. A weariness that comes from being constantly on guard, constantly ready to defend, constantly vigilant against the next betrayal. Anger becomes armor. And like all armor, it protects you, but also limits you. You can't embrace someone while wearing armor. You can't be fully present while defending yourself. You can't experience real intimacy while constantly preparing for war. The very thing that's supposed to keep you safe actually keeps you isolated, disconnected, alone. And slowly, over time, the pattern shifts. Situations that would have sent you into a rage become opportunities for curiosity. People who would have triggered your defenses become teachers, showing you where you're still holding on, still demanding, still refusing to accept reality as it is. You become less reactive, less defended, more open, more free. This doesn't mean you become passive or weak. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When you're not wasting energy on anger, when you're not constantly in fight mode, you have access to a different kind of strength. A strength that comes from clarity rather than reactivity, from wisdom rather than woundedness, from love rather than fear. You can speak truth without needing to attack. You can hold people accountable without needing to punish them. You can protect yourself without needing to build fortresses. You can acknowledge harm without getting lost in victimhood. You can set boundaries without needing to make the other person wrong. You can walk away from relationships that don't serve you without needing to destroy them on your way out. This is the freedom that Merton discovered. Not freedom from having feelings, but freedom from being controlled by them. Not freedom from being hurt, but freedom from letting that hurt turn you into someone you don't want to be. Not freedom from conflict, but freedom from the internal war that exhausts you even when the external battle is over. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop needing people to be different, they sometimes change anyway. Not because you've manipulated them or convinced them or worn them down, but because the energy between you has shifted. When you're no longer radiating anger and resentment, when you're no longer locked in the dance of attack and defend, there's space for something new. Sometimes that something new is healing. Sometimes it's just peace. Sometimes it's simply the ability to let go and move on. But even when nothing changes externally, everything has changed internally. You're no longer a prisoner of your anger. You're no longer waiting for someone else to apologize, to change, to finally see the error of their ways so you can feel okay again. Your peace doesn't depend on their transformation. Your freedom doesn't require their acknowledgement. You found something they can never take from you, because it was never theirs to give in the first place. This is what it means to never be mad at anyone again. Not because you've achieved some superhuman level of patience, not because you've become so enlightened that nothing bothers you, but because you've understood something fundamental about the nature of anger itself. You've seen that it's always a door you choose to walk through, and you can choose differently. You can choose to pause before reacting, to feel before responding, to question before judging, to understand before condemning. You can choose to see the full humanity of the person in front of you, even when they're showing you their worst. You can choose to protect yourself without needing to destroy them. You can choose freedom over being right. And the more you make this choice, the more natural it becomes. The neural pathways of anger begin to quiet. The old stories lose their power. The triggers that used to send you spiraling become gentle reminders to breathe, to center, to choose again. You become someone different, not perfect, not invulnerable, but free. Genuinely free. In the end, this is what Merton understood in the silence of his contemplation. That anger is a kind of prayer we don't want to be praying, a prayer that says, I refuse to accept what is, I refuse to see clearly, I refuse to let go of my need to control, I refuse to be at peace with uncertainty. And as long as we're praying that prayer, we're trapped, we're suffering, we're at war with reality itself. But we can choose a different prayer, a prayer that says, I see what is, even when it hurts. I accept what I cannot change. I release my need to control what was never mine to control. I choose peace over proving I'm right. I choose freedom over holding on to my anger. This prayer doesn't come naturally. It has to be practiced, cultivated, chosen again and again until it becomes who you are. But when it does, when you finally embody this truth, you discover something miraculous. The world doesn't have to change for you to be free. People don't have to apologize for you to move forward. Justice doesn't have to be served for you to find peace. You've found something that no external circumstance can give you or take away. You've found the stillness at the center of all the chaos. You've found your way home. And from that place you can engage with the world without being consumed by it. You can love without losing yourself. You can fight for what's right without being destroyed by what's wrong. You can feel the full range of human emotion without being controlled by any of it. You can be hurt without becoming bitter. You can be disappointed without becoming cynical. You can be betrayed without becoming closed. This is the gift that Merton offers us. Not a technique or a strategy, but a way of being. A way of moving through the world that honors both the difficulty of human relationship and the possibility of genuine freedom. A way of holding pain without adding suffering to it. A way of seeing clearly without losing compassion. A way of being fully alive without being constantly at war. So the next time you feel anger rising, remember this. Remember that you have a choice. Not an easy choice, but a real one. You can feed the anger, nurture it, let it grow into resentment and bitterness and a hardness that protects you, but also isolates you. Or you can pause, breathe, look beneath the anger to see what's really there. Question your expectations. See the full humanity of the person who's triggered you. Choose understanding over judgment. Choose freedom over being right. It won't be perfect. You'll still get angry sometimes. You'll still react before you think. You'll still fall into old patterns. But each time you catch yourself, each time you choose differently, you're creating new possibilities. You're becoming someone new, someone freer, someone more at peace, someone who can walk through a difficult world without carrying the weight of everyone else's failures. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Not perfection, but progress. Not transcendence, but transformation. Not the absence of anger, but the presence of something deeper, truer, more sustaining. The presence of a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. The presence of a freedom that no one can take from you. The presence of a love that includes everyone, even the people who've hurt you, even yourself. This is what Merton discovered in the silence. This is what he offers to anyone willing to listen. Not a guarantee that you'll never feel angry again, but a promise that anger doesn't have to control you, that you can choose something different, something better, something that will transform not just how you relate to others, but how you relate to yourself, to life, to the fundamental mystery of being alive. And in that transformation, you'll find something you didn't even know you were looking for. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of grace. Not the elimination of conflict, but the capacity to hold it without being destroyed by it. Not a life free from pain, but a life that knows how to move through pain without adding unnecessary suffering. This is the way. Not easy, but true. Not comfortable, but liberating. Not what we expect, but exactly what we need. The way of seeing clearly. The way of letting go. The way of choosing peace over proving we're right. The way of being human without being controlled by every human emotion. The way of living fully without being constantly at war. And it starts with a single choice. Right now. In this moment. With whoever has triggered you most recently. Can you pause? Can you breathe? Can you see beneath your anger to what's really there? Can you question your expectations? Can you see their humanity even when they can't see yours? Can you choose freedom over holding on? You can. And when you do, everything changes. Not all at once. Not permanently. But real change nonetheless. The kind of change that ripples outward, touching everyone around you. The kind of change that makes the world a little softer, a little more compassionate, a little more human. The kind of change that starts with you, but doesn't end there. This is what Merton knew, this is what he lived, and this is what he offers to anyone brave enough to try. The possibility of a life without anger's prison, the possibility of freedom in the midst of difficulty, the possibility of peace that passes understanding. Not someday, not when everything is perfect, but now, right now, in this moment, with this person, in this situation. Do this and you'll never be mad at anyone again. Not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've finally learned how to see. And when you can see clearly, really see, anger becomes impossible. Because you understand, you accept, you let go, and you're free. You